so that's kind of, again, tackling this baseline element where you can establish, who's responsible for what and when. And then when responsibilities change or when they're bottlenecked, how that impacts everyone. So again, back to that concept of transparency is that potentially if owners can see that and how their decisions are impacting, their project and their schedule and their budget, that could end up just naturally, organically assisting the contracting teams.
Well, tell me a little bit more about what you mean by the boundaries of what's possible.
Sure. So in terms of if, for example, a developer has the ability to see logistics behind it, it doesn't have to be to a micro level. It could be even
Sure.
macro, right? Just macro scheduling, for example, macro proposals of budgets. So if they can understand and see how their decisions will, in a, I'll call it proactive manner, affect downstream of the project, then that will cause hesitation on their, decisions that may be unachievable for, any realm of realistic reality. So what I mean by that, for example, is if there is this level of transparency, then a contractor, for example, could, combine or have support from design teams because they're also going to be impacted, reflect what a change would look like as it relates to a schedule and budget, and then allow for a developer to make that decision thereafter.
What kind of rhythm do you think a project reporting rhythm and meeting rhythm should a project be in order to ensure that this level of transparency, accountability, and communication is maintained?
Sure. So, it actually surprises me whenever I have a discussion with a developer who is what I call this very hands-off type developer, and they kind of don't have context of what's going on their job sites aside for maybe a monthly report. So I would say that that's not great. I'm used to the perspective of being literally every single day on a job site and having that understanding so that these issues or these friction points don't occur, right? So that reactions and decisions could be made from understanding what's happening in reality and how performance is being achieved. So I would suggest at a minimum twice a week to understand the nuances of what's happening on a project.
Okay, so twice a week. And would you recommend that's in person, or are we doing a combination of in person and Zoom? What's up with that?
I definitely think in person is better. I mean, we're a very much a relationship-based industry. We're talking about, manual work.
Yes.
So I think it's really important to show face, as we call it, as the saying goes. With that said, there is obviously times when builders are doing projects in different states, and maybe that's not accessible for that individual, the literal owner. So I would suggest in those cases, hire a representative for you who's going to be there more frequently. So I definitely think on-site is super important and a minimum twice a week, if not more.
So in your experience in your career, you started in, just give us like the 30-second synopsis of your career, because I think this will help us with the questions I want to ask you real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started off kind of as a project manager, owner's rep for a developer in New York City, role being, to be on job sites every day and ensure that, accountability exists across all of the company stakeholders, all of the project stakeholders. I was doing that for about 7 years and, came to responsibilities of managing projects in its entirety. Everything from, bringing on contracting teams and design teams to reporting to lenders. So very much that point person to really what we're talking about, right? Understand how this ecosystem of process of operations work and how project success occurs.
Okay. So give me more of the developer owner's perspective. Where do general contractors drop the ball the most?
Great question. I would suggest that occurs when a developer is not, based on what we just said, right, is not showing up on site enough to understand what's happening and shift dynamic accordingly. So dropping the ball could be things from, not having collaborative scheduling for their subs occur in a, effective way. If, logistic issues happen, which are not always a contractor's fault, but the developer, if they're not on site every day, they're not seeing that and understanding that. And that obviously then creates a domino effect of just madness, right? So I think I think the ball that gets dropped is scheduling piece. Beyond scheduling, I would say that it's, out of control, which is logistics. And coming from New York City, the logistics element was
Yeah.
something that very frequently happened.
It's really interesting there. So let's say I'm a general contractor. I've contracted with an owner who is a little bit hands off and yet demanding. So they do the swoop in. They swoop in, and then they swoop out, and they just swooped, and I'm like, okay, great. So this changes everything.
Right.
I think my first piece of advice is don't work with those types of folks. But let's say I am working with them and I have a contract and therefore I'm committed. What steps can I immediately take as a contractor to begin to try and modify the behavior of the owner?
Definitely. What I would suggest is, again, kind of this thesis, not to be annoying here, but the thesis of JetBuild, right, is so you have a platform that is allowing the developer the opportunity to have insight into what's happening, but then also allowing for the contractor to report to the developer in a simplistic manner. So if you have a central product, a central software that assists you in all of your collaborative and operation aspects, it also will, provide very clean and simple data to then report to the developer to kind of bridge that gap that might exist.
Okay. So in your experience, what are the one or two things that general contractors don't say to owners and developers that they need to say?
I think realities. I think you should not be afraid to speak a reality, meaning don't say yes to everything if it can't be accomplished. I think that puts you in a hole down the line for that project and then also for future.
Okay, that's a great answer. So here I am, then I'm a general contractor. I've got a relatively new project manager on site, and perhaps their inclination is to say yes. The owner comes in, the owner's, a dude or a dudette, and they've got power.
Sure.
And, I'm just going, yes, yes, yes. How can I train my project managers when to say no and to say it in such a way that they don't alienate the relationship with the owner?
Great question. And it's actually quite simple. The answer is always, if you're not sure, say, hey, you know what? I'm not sure. I'm going to check and I'll get back to you same day, right? If you have pressure in terms of, timing and need to respond, say, I'll get back to you later today.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So create that buffer so that they can consult back with their leaders and make sure that they're all on the same page with the answer.
For sure.
Okay, so let's go even a layer deeper. I have in my mind a subcontractor, a friend of mine, or a company that I've worked with for almost 2 decades now, and they have this phrase in their head: "We run the job." Okay, we run the job, and they're a framing contractor, right? So the reality is that they've got a whole bunch of other stuff going on around them, but they view it as I'm going to work with the general contractor. I'm going to let them know what my scope is and how that's going to fit in with the overall execution of the project and where I'm coming in. And I'm going to do my very best to even negotiate with the other subs so that we get to get our stuff in a way that makes money for us, but then also benefits the project. So let's say I'm a sub then, and I'm looking up at the GC or looking at the GC, and the GC doesn't have their act together. The owner's kind of out of control. As a sub, what do I do then?
Well, I mean, that's a really, really tough situation. I think in that scenario, so I'll say two things. One is if you're working with a very difficult owner, then, I mean, you're in a tough spot, right? Because that would probably mean the owner is not really active on the job site, doesn't actually see what's happening, and will just point fingers. Yeah. If you happen to be working with a developer who is hands-on and who is supportive and of their own project, right, thus being supportive of everyone, then I would say it's very, very likely that the developer recognizes that. I don't know if the right thing to do would be go directly to the developer, but it would be strange to me if the developer wasn't aware and adjusting however they can accordingly. And what I mean by that is, if I were in the developer's shoes and I saw that scenario, meaning I see my subs performing, but my GC being a bottleneck, then, I would quite frankly take matters in my own hands as much as I could, as much as contract allows or as much as communication that I have directly to the subs. And I would try to circumvent the GC as much as possible, to be honest.